Oh, perfect. Oh, thanks for that, Casey. All right, guys, we're good to go. Let's carry on.
Okay. Well, happy Friday, guys. Today, the demo I'm going to do is kind of beyond just the profiler. We're going to do a very simple anomaly detection of some data coming into Metron. And it really nicely ties together a lot of the different features that a lot of different people have worked on. From parsing, enrichment, the profiler, all the way through threat triage using Stellar, of course, the REPL, and also the stats package that we have in Stellar. So it's kind of a nice amalgamation of all of that. So what I've set up, if you can see my console, and let me know, how does the text look for everyone? Is it too small?
I can see just fine.
Okay, good. So what I have is, just so we can easily see this, is I have a script that's just going to kick out messages, simple JSON every 2 seconds. So very simple. Running the script, we're going to see this, and I'm calling this my values feed. So it's equivalent to adding a new data feed or a new parser into Metron at this point. So right now I'm going to check Kafka and I can see the data coming in. So I've got an IP source address and some hypothetical value, which is just right now just some number between 0 and 32,000. So before this, I also set up a simple parser using the JSON map parser. So we can see that the parser is running because we'll see data hitting the enrichments queue. And so again, we can see the same type of data. We've got the IP source address, the value, and then we see that the parser added on the timestamp and the source type. So now that I've got that working, we can use, like I've shown before, the profiler to set up a profile of those values coming in. And what the definition looks like in this case is I have one profile defined here. I'm going to call it the values profile. And I'm going to define a separate profile for each IP source address that I see. And just in this simple example, it's only a single IP. But obviously in the real world, there's going to be tons of IPs. The next field is only if, so you're only applying messages that meet this predicate to this profile. So I'm going to say there has to be a value field in the message coming in. I could filter it by source type, by IP address. I could say if this is internal IP versus external. So this expression gives you a lot of ability to filter the kind of data that you want to apply to your profile. Every time a message comes in, I'm going to update the profile. And I have this, I'm going to use the stats package that I mentioned before. So the stats are stored in a variable called S in this case, and I'm adding the value to it each time that a message comes in. And then I'm obviously storing it in a variable S. After the period expires, so the profile has a period duration. Typically it's 15 minutes. You can define it to be anything you want. In this case, I've made it 1 minute just so I can see results more quickly. I just return that stats object. So in other examples we've looked at, I'm storing numeric values, but I think this is a really interesting kind of combination of the profiler and the stats package in that we can store any object that's serializable. So I'm going to store this kind of representation of the data of the value in the profiler, and then I can extract different types of metrics or stats from that object after the fact. So I have a great deal more flexibility doing it this way. So I've already loaded that up, and I have the profile running. And so now in this shell, I have Stellar. I'm just on the same machine. I'm on Quick Dev. I'm going to take a look at that profile. So I called it values. I'm interested in this particular IP, and I want to see it for the past 15 minutes. So here you can see a bunch of different values got returned. So like I said, this is not just a number, it's this object that the stats package uses. So as you'll see there, it says online statistics provider. There's a couple different providers you can use. That's kind of beyond the scope of the demo, but you know, these are objects now that I can do interesting stuff with. So we've got multiple. So we've got a nice stats merge function that I can use to then merge all of those different values into one stats object. And then I could say, okay, give me the mean of this. So there's the mean of the values I'm getting, which kind of makes sense, right? Because I said it's between 0 and 32K. I can look at the min. I can look at the percentile, say the 90th percentile. So, you know, after the fact, instead of baking this into the profiler beforehand and storing in separate profiles the mean, the min, the max, the percentile, any other stat you could represent or think of, now I'm calculating and doing that after the fact when I'm doing my modeling. So that's where kind of the flexibility, I think, comes from. So now what I'm going to do is actually use this data, the profile, to do some enrichment and ultimately some threat triage. I'm going to use actually another piece of functionality that I didn't mention before is kind of the management stuff that was added to Stellar so that we can change the configuration on the fly and do some fun stuff like that. So first, just to give us a baseline, let's look at the indexing topic. And so now we see this is the enriched data that's coming through. So you'll see through the pipeline, you get these different timestamps that are more debug related, performance related type tuning. But this is what everything is looking like at this point before I start doing my enrichment. Go ahead and leave that running. Now I want to kind of build my enrichment on the fly, and doing it in the shell like this really helps to debug what you're doing. So just for working through this, I'm going to set an IP source address that I want to work with. I'm going to create a variable called isAlert, and this is part of threat triage. So when you're doing threat triage, if the source or the message doesn't have a value called isAlert set to true, it won't run threat triage on it. So in this case, I'm saying if the source type is values, I want isAlert to be true so that threat triage runs on the data. I'm going to define a threshold for that value, and I'm going to get the percentile of my merged profile data, profile get, and I care about IP source address, the values profile for the given IP source address. So when this is actually running in the enrichment side, it'll refer to whatever IP source address is in the message. But in this case, this is the reason why I set the IP source address 2 lines prior to this, so that I can see that my expression works. So I want to look for the past, let's just say the past 30 minutes. We're going to merge all those stats objects anyway. And I'm looking at the 90th percentile. And you can see value threshold. So I got a value. So I know the expression is good. So now I'm going to define those enrichment fields. So I'm going to pull out my conf. I'm going to say conf get enrichment. I want the values enrichment. And if none is defined, go ahead and give me a minimal configuration, which is what that is. So now I've got a minimal configuration for values. Now I'm going to add my first enrichments. So, information add. So what this is doing, so this shell vars to map. So in Stellar, behind the scenes, it's storing not only the value of the variable, but the expression that was used to arrive at that result. So this shell vars to map pulls out that expression. And so now I can see in my conf object, which I haven't pushed out into Metron yet. And I'm still building that. So I can see now that we have this isAlert that's that's set to source type equals values. I'm going to do that again for the enrichment stellar transform. I'm going to add another enrichment. No, I'm going to use that value threshold variable that I used before. So now I've got the isAlert and the value threshold. I'm fairly confident those expressions will work because I've just tested them. So now I'm going to work on my threat triage rules. So what I want to do is say, if the value that comes through a message is greater than the 90th percentile, which is my threshold here that I calculated, I want to throw up, I want to set the score, the triage score, rather high so that it pops up in my Metron dashboard and I can have somebody look at it. I'm going to set a variable called outlier. This is when the value is greater than my value threshold. I'm going to create another variable, rules. So when that outlier expression is true, the score is going to be set to 100. Some random value. It's really up to you to define what is big, what is little, and what it means to you. I'll set my conf. I'm going to add my threat triage. So to my conf, I add my rules. So now you'll see we have the enrichment piece and we have the threat triage piece. So if the value is greater than the value threshold, it's going to get a score of 100. Doing it this way, I think, is kind of nice because you'll get the context of what the value threshold actually was for each message if you were to get an alert. You could not even do this enrichment and bake this entire expression into here, but you wouldn't have a good view of what the threshold was when you exceeded it. So now I've got my conf. Now I'm going to save it into Metron as the values. So we should see pretty quickly that would be. So here, so highlighted in yellow will be threshold. So here we had all prior to here is before I saved the enrichment, and then all of a sudden we started getting this value threshold. So based on the profile data coming in, the 90th percentile is about 29,000. And you'll see this value change as the profiler writes more values and the actual profile changes over that previous 2-hour window that I put in that expression. So what we should see is if the value actually exceeds that threshold, we should get a threat triage level, and we're actually already, that's prior testing. Yeah, so here we actually had a hit, right? So we have a lot of misses. We're not exceeding that 90th percentile. But in this case right here, and let me kill this, we have the threat triage score of 100 because the value itself was 32,000, which is greater than that threshold at this time of 29,488. So there you go. I mean, that ties together, a lot of those pieces that we've been building for quite a while. Any questions? This is, really basic outlier analysis, but it kind of piles on all that stuff that a lot of people have been working on. With that, I'll kind of open it up to questions.
So the significance of this, Nick, right, is that you can tie deterministic rules via Stellar, machine learning models, and threat intel all within the same triage function.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So this is a very basic outlier analysis that I did via just configuration using the tools that we have in Metron. that you could do for a lot of the different data feeds that you have coming in. So, you could combine with the profiler data elements that are coming from multiple different feeds, combine them together, doing ratios and things like that, and then do a basic, outlier based on that metric that the profile saves. So, this is even without using all that model as a service type functionality where you could do much more rigorous models. It's kind of cool how easy that was.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive. All right, I think that's the main thing we wanted to show. So does anybody have anything else they wanted to show for this demo? Most of the work this time around was centered around upgrades and extensions to the management pack, so not quite demonstrable at this point, but hopefully once we get over that hurdle, we'll be able to demo more features and capabilities. All right, guys, if no one has anything else, we'll call it a meeting.